Welcome the Lord's chosen. They don't hate your silence. They hate what it exposes in their noise. There's something quietly nuclear about refusing to shrink yourself just to fit in. Society doesn't want depth. It wants digestible humans. Easy to read, easy to manage, easy to predict. The moment you stop watering down your mind just to keep the peace, people start acting like you've committed a social crime. It's almost comical. You decline to participate in gossip or small talk, and suddenly you're the problem. Studies have shown that humans often equate familiarity with comfort and intelligence with threat. In other words, when you stop pretending to be average, you automatically make people feel unsafe, not because you're dangerous, but because you remind them how much they've settled. That discomfort you see on their faces isn't about you being antisocial. It's about their internal system panicking at the presence of someone who refuses to play dumb to belong. They'll tell you you're too serious, too deep, or too distant. Translation, you're too real for their performance. You've simply outgrown the shallow end of the human pool, while most are still busy, splashing around trying to look interesting. So no, you're not unsocial. You're just allergic to artificiality. And in a world that thrives on diluted minds, authenticity will always sound like arrogance. Brace yourself, because in this video we're about to uncover why your refusal to dumb yourself down is making people uncomfortable, threatened, and quite frankly, exposed. Number one, you don't belong in the tribe because you were born to question it. That's the truth most people can't handle about you. The world runs on unspoken agreements. Silent contracts that say, don't question too much, don't think too deep, and definitely don't make anyone uncomfortable by being too aware. But you were never built for that kind of quiet obedience. You came with a mind that doesn't sit still, a spirit that refuses to nod along just to keep friends, and a soul that would rather be alone with truth than surrounded by lies that feel warm. Most people bond through sameness. They talk about what they've seen on TV, the latest drama, or what someone else did wrong. It's not connection. It's comfort through repetition. You, on the other hand, don't find peace in recycled thoughts. You crave meaning, not maintenance. So when you're in a group and you don't react the way they expect, when you don't laugh at the small talk or feed the gossip, they feel something unfamiliar. Exposure, because your presence silently asks, why are we even talking about this? And that's a question most don't want to face. You're not trying to be better than anyone. You're just allergic to pretending. But to those who build their identities around approval, your honesty feels like arrogance. They don't see your independence as peace. They see it as rejection. And that's why they get uncomfortable. You're not rejecting them. You're rejecting the mental prison they've accepted as home. You stand outside the gate, and that alone is enough to make them question why they're still inside. It's not that you can't fit in. It's that you won't shrink to do it. The tribe survives on agreement. You survive on authenticity. They find safety in numbers while you find safety in truth. You'd rather lose a crowd than lose yourself. And that makes you rare in a world addicted to applause. So yes, your refusal to play along makes people uneasy. Not because you think you're special, but because deep down you remind them that they could be free too. If only they were brave enough to stop pretending. And that's something most would rather resent than respect. Number two, mediocrity needs company. Mastery doesn't. Most people don't socialize because they love others. They socialize because they can't stand being alone with themselves. Their conversations are a way to avoid silence, because silence has a way of showing them everything they've been running from. When someone like you pulls away from that noise, it threatens the entire system that keeps mediocrity alive. Your solitude exposes the weakness in their togetherness. You've learned that isolation isn't punishment. It's a privilege. The mind sharpens in quiet. The spirit grows in peace. While they're busy blending in, you're busy building within. You've realized that connection without depth drains more than it gives. So you stopped chasing the crowd. You started protecting your clarity. And the moment you did that, they began to whisper that you'd changed. They call it arrogance, but it's actually evolution. Mediocre minds feed off attention because attention feels like meaning. They can't process that someone would rather spend time refining themselves than performing for others. When you choose solitude, they see it as loss. What they don't understand is that mastery requires separation. From gossip, from validation, from constant stimulation. You can't create something extraordinary if you're addicted to being understood by the ordinary. Your withdrawal reveals what most people are hiding. They're terrified of stillness. Stillness forces reflection. Reflection demands change. Change feels like death to those who built their lives around comfort. So when you refuse to dumb yourself down to join the collective, they feel abandoned. Not because you left them, but because you proved there's another way to live. The truth is, mediocrity is social by nature because it can't survive self-awareness. It relies on noise, comparison, and group reassurance. But mastery thrives in the dark, in those lonely hours where nobody's clapping, nobody's watching, and nobody's affirming. You grow when you're not performing. You build strength in the silence that frightens them. So yes, your isolation irritates people. It exposes the emptiness in their constant motion. They can't understand why you don't need their approval anymore. But that's the difference. They socialize to forget themselves. You isolate to find yourself. And that's why they talk. And you transform. Number 3, you're a mirror that doesn't flatter. And that's why people feel uneasy around you. Most have built their lives around carefully crafted versions of themselves, images that look confident on the outside but are held together by fragile approval. When they stand next to you, those masks begin to crack. You don't do it intentionally. You don't call them out or criticize them. Your very presence, your honesty, your self-awareness, your refusal to play fake, does it for you. You reflect them back to themselves without filters, and what they see isn't always pretty. People crave validation more than truth. They want to be seen, but only through the soft lighting of flattery. When you interact with them without feeding their illusions, it shakes them. They start feeling judged, not because you're judging them, but because your authenticity leaves them with nowhere to hide. You make them aware of the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. That's why they often label you as cold, distant, or too serious. Those words aren't insults. They're confessions. They're saying, "You make me uncomfortable in my act." Most social dynamics run on silent lies, polite dishonesty, mutual pretending, emotional editing. Everyone's trying to protect their ego's image. But you've stopped doing that. You don't participate in emotional theater. You tell the truth without sugar, and you stay real even when it costs you popularity. That kind of presence doesn't blend well with people who depend on constant reassurance. To them, your directness feels threatening because it demands they either evolve or withdraw, and many choose the second option. The irony is that the ones who resent you the most are often the ones who secretly admire you. They envy your freedom, the peace that comes with not having to perform. Deep down, they wish they could live that way too. But facing yourself requires courage, and courage is rare. So they project their discomfort onto you. They call you hard to relate to. But what they really mean is you don't make them feel safe in their lies. You're the mirror that tells the truth even when it's inconvenient. And in a world where everyone's addicted to flattery, honesty feels like violence. Number 4, most people don't talk to understand or grow. They talk to fill the silence that scares them. Meaningless conversations are the world's most accepted form of sedation. They're how people keep their insecurities from surfacing. They gossip, complain, and repeat recycled opinions, not because they enjoy it, but because silence would force them to hear the noise inside their own minds. So when you don't join in, when you don't add to the chaos, you interrupt their coping mechanism. You become the reminder that they're not actually connecting, they're escaping. Your refusal to engage in small talk feels like rejection to them, but it's really resistance. You've realized that energy is currency, and not every conversation deserves to spend it. Every time you stay quiet instead of contributing to empty dialogue, you're protecting your peace. But to them, you're disturbing theirs. They need someone to echo their complaints, to laugh at their gossip, to keep the illusion alive that this endless noise is normal. When you deny them that, they see you as distant or too serious, when really you're just detoxing from a world addicted to distraction. Meaningless chatter is how people maintain the illusion of belonging. It gives them temporary relief, a hit of connection that never lasts. But for someone who values truth, that kind of exchange feels like spiritual pollution. You crave depth, not distraction. You want conversations that wake the soul, not lull it back to sleep. And because you can't fake enthusiasm for shallow energy, you often get labeled as antisocial. But in reality, you're just awake in a room full of sleepers. The irony is that your silence is louder than their talk. It makes people nervous because it forces awareness back into the space they were trying to fill. Suddenly they're confronted with themselves, their thoughts, their emptiness, their need to always be entertained. That's why they resent you. You remind them of everything they've been avoiding by talking so much. You're not rude for wanting meaning. You're not strange for craving stillness. You're just one of the few who's realized that endless chatter doesn't make people closer. It just keeps them numb. And once you've tasted real conversation, you can't go back to sedation disguised as connection. Number 5, people love intelligence, as long as it comes with an apology. They're fine with you being smart, as long as you package it with modesty, humor, or self-deprecation. But the moment you stop performing, the moment you speak with clarity, instead of shrinking your thoughts to make others comfortable, suddenly you're arrogant, too full of yourself, or trying too hard. It's not your intelligence that offends them. It's the fact that you don't disguise it for their comfort. Most people are comfortable with intelligence as long as it plays by social rules. They want it charming, watered down, and easy to digest. They want smart people who still laugh at the wrong jokes, agree with popular nonsense, and pretend not to see through hypocrisy. But true intelligence doesn't perform. It perceives, it questions, it disrupts. And that's what makes people nervous. Your presence exposes how shallow their conversations and thinking patterns really are. It's easier to call you arrogant than to admit they've stopped growing. You don't flaunt your mind, you just don't suppress it. But in a world where mediocrity is the norm, that's enough to make you look threatening. People mistake your confidence for superiority because they've been conditioned to equate humility with self-erasure. They don't understand that you can be humble and still refuse to play small. You're not saying you're better, you're just done pretending to be less. The truth is, intelligence that doesn't conform feels dangerous. It can't be controlled or predicted. It doesn't seek validation or approval. And that alone disrupts the social hierarchy built on insecurity. When you speak truth without softening it, when you express insight without trying to sound relatable, you're exposing something most people spend their lives hiding, their own intellectual laziness. You've stopped editing yourself for comfort, and that's what bothers them. You think freely, speak directly, and refuse to dilute your brilliance for acceptance. In a world addicted to intellectual politeness, that's seen as rebellion. But you weren't meant to perform your intelligence like a circus act. You were meant to live it, breathe it, and let it stand without explanation. And when intelligence refuses to entertain, it doesn't just enlighten, it unsettles. Because truth, when unfiltered, doesn't fit into everyone's small talk. Number 6, people love the idea of you until they realize they can't control it. They want access to your warmth, but not the fire that fuels it. They want the pieces of you that make them feel good, not the depth that demands growth. You were never meant to be digestible, but most people prefer comfort over truth. They want you available, not authentic. They want your glow, not your gravity. And when you stop making yourself easy to consume, they suddenly call you distant, cold, or antisocial, labels that help them avoid admitting they just couldn't handle your full presence. You've noticed how people celebrate you when you're soft-spoken, funny, or helpful, but grow uneasy when you're assertive, firm, or deeply self-aware. It's not that they dislike you. They just prefer you edited. They want you filtered through their insecurities. When you show the raw, unfiltered parts of your spirit, your conviction, your boundaries, your clarity, it clashes with the parts of them still living small. That's why your confidence feels like confrontation to them. The truth is, people are addicted to familiarity, not authenticity. They want relationships they can predict, not ones that challenge their comfort zones. So when you evolve, when you start valuing solitude, protecting your peace, or speaking truth without sugar, you stop being relatable. Suddenly, the same people who once admired your strength now interpret it as arrogance. They don't realize it's not arrogance, it's alignment. You're not pulling away from people, you're pulling away from pretending. It's easier for them to say you've changed than to admit they've stayed the same. They can't process that you no longer respond to manipulation disguised as friendship, or that you no longer bend just to keep a connection alive. Your independence exposes their dependency. Your peace threatens their need for chaos. And your self-respect reminds them of all the times they abandoned theirs. So they try to make you feel guilty for being real. They say you're too much, too quiet, or too detached. But what they really mean is, you stopped being what I could control. They want you accessible, on their terms, on their timeline, in their comfort zone. But you've outgrown being available for people who only show up when you're dimmed. You're not antisocial. You're just done performing for those who never intended to see the real you. Number 7, small minds will always misread silence. When you stop entertaining shallow conversations or emotional chaos, they assume you think you're better than them. But the truth is far simpler and far quieter. You're just tired of spending your energy on things that don't feed your spirit. You've learned that peace costs more than attention, and you're finally unwilling to trade it. That doesn't make you proud. It makes you aware. Yet awareness looks like arrogance to people who need noise to feel alive. You've probably noticed how some people take your calmness personally. They think your quiet means you're judging them. They think your detachment is arrogance, but you're not judging anyone. You've just stopped participating in what drains you. You've stopped seeking validation from the same people who never valued your presence when they had it. You've stopped explaining yourself to minds determined to misunderstand you. And because their world runs on reaction and performance, your peace feels like rejection. People who rely on external approval can't understand someone who finds comfort in their own company. They mistake your self-containment for coldness, your independence for ego, and your boundaries for attitude. But that's because they live through others. They don't know who they are without constant feedback. When you pull back from that cycle, you disrupt the rhythm of their insecurity. You expose how much they depend on attention to feel important. What they call superiority is actually self-control. You've learned that not every situation deserves your reaction, not every argument deserves your logic, and not every person deserves access to your energy. Protecting your peace isn't arrogance, it's maturity. You've simply realized that connection without alignment is chaos in disguise. But here's the irony. The same people who accuse you of being too proud often secretly envy your composure. They wish they could stay that centered. They wish they could walk away without guilt. Deep down, they know you've mastered something they haven't, the art of not needing validation to exist peacefully. So let them misunderstand you. Your calm isn't superiority, it's survival. You're not avoiding people because you think you're above them. You're avoiding the drama that tries to pull you back down. Peace has become your priority, and small minds will always confuse that for pride. Number 8. The more you grow, the harder it becomes to communicate with those who haven't. Evolution changes your language, not your vocabulary, but your vibration. You stop finding excitement in gossip because it feels like eating emotional junk food. You stop engaging in vanity because you've outgrown the need to be seen just to feel valuable. You stop feeding victimhood because you've realized that pain isn't your identity. It was only your initiation. The moment you start speaking from awareness instead of ego, you notice how few people actually understand you. What used to feel like connection now feels like translation work. You're not trying to sound deep. You've just stopped pretending to be shallow. You can't talk about trivial things for long because they don't nourish your mind anymore. You'd rather discuss growth, purpose, patterns, energy, truth, the real mechanics of the human experience. But most people aren't ready for that kind of depth. They call it too intense, too spiritual, or too serious, because your words reveal what they've been avoiding. It's not that you've changed too much, it's that they've stayed too still. To the unawakened, your peace feels like distance. They mistake your detachment for disinterest. They can't see that you're simply tuning into a higher frequency, one that no longer vibrates at complaint, comparison, or chaos. You haven't gone quiet because you're cold. You've gone quiet because truth doesn't need to shout. You're fluent in understanding, but surrounded by people who only speak reaction. And when consciousness speaks to confusion, it always sounds foreign. That's why your circle gets smaller. Evolution always edits. You start attracting souls, not crowds, people who understand pauses, energy, and intention. Conversations shift from gossip to growth, from judgment to awareness, from noise to knowing. It's not loneliness, it's recalibration. People who haven't evolved yet will say you've become distant, but you haven't. You've just become clear. You're not above them. You're just tuned to something real. You no longer need to fill space with meaningless talk because you've learned that silence often speaks the truth faster than words ever can. So yes, your language has become rare, not because you're superior, but because you've started speaking from the soul, and not everyone has learned to listen there. Number 9, they don't actually miss you. They miss the version of you who made them feel needed, the version that over-explained, over-gave, and over-apologized, the version that tiptoed around people's insecurities, constantly seeking permission to exist. When you finally stopped begging for validation and started moving with quiet certainty, the people who depended on your old energy suddenly felt abandoned. They weren't attached to you. They were attached to the access they had to your weakness. The truth is, a lot of relationships are built on unspoken power dynamics. Some people feel valuable only when others feel small. So as long as you doubted yourself, they felt secure. Your insecurity gave them a role, the comforter, the advisor, the one who understood you. But once you began standing in your own confidence, the balance shifted. You didn't need reassurance anymore, and that stripped them of significance. It wasn't love they lost. It was control. When you rise in self-worth, it naturally creates distance. Not because you pull away, but because the vibration changes. You stop needing constant feedback to feel validated. You stop chasing those who breadcrumb your attention. You stop entertaining the emotionally unavailable because you no longer mistake difficulty for depth. And when that happens, anyone who thrived on your old patterns feels like you've changed. But you didn't change, you healed. And healing always exposes who was benefiting from your wounds. They start saying things like, "You're different," or "You've become distant," when what they really mean is, "I can't manipulate you the way I used to." Your self-assurance reads as arrogance to those who profited from your doubt. You're not harder to reach. You're just no longer reachable through pity, guilt, or flattery. You've stopped translating your worth into someone else's language, and that makes them uncomfortable. But this is what growth looks like, the collapsing of connections that can't survive truth. You're not unapproachable. You're just resonating at a frequency that demands authenticity. Only those who love you without needing your insecurity will meet you there. Everyone else will mourn the version of you that kept them comfortable, the one who needed saving, when in reality you were never broken. You were just remembering who you were before the world convinced you to beg for approval. Number 10, you make people uneasy, not because you're confrontational, but because you're real in a world that runs on pretense. Most people have built their sense of stability on well-rehearsed performances, pretending to be happy, pretending to be confident, pretending to be moral while living the exact opposite. Their comfort isn't built on truth, it's built on shared illusion. So when someone like you walks in, someone who refuses to play the part, who speaks plainly, and who doesn't hide behind masks, it shakes their entire foundation. Your authenticity doesn't just stand out, it exposes. They can feel it, even before you say a word. Your energy makes the air heavier because it doesn't carry deceit. Around you, small talk feels forced, fake laughter sounds off, and shallow confidence begins to wilt. You don't call anyone out, you simply exist without compromise, and that alone disarms them. Because when you stop pretending, you silently challenge everyone still pretending. And nobody wants to admit that the version of themselves they've been defending for years isn't even real. People who build comfort on lies depend on agreement to survive. As long as everyone's acting, the illusion stays intact. But when you stop playing your assigned role, it's like walking off stage in the middle of their script. You break the spell. You remind them that truth is an option, and options terrify the comfortably numb. It forces them to look at how much of their normal life is actually avoidance wrapped in routine. That's why they project discomfort onto you. They'll say you're too serious, too blunt, or hard to be around. What they really mean is that your presence interrupts their fantasy. You make authenticity look easy, and that makes their pretending feel expensive. They can't maintain their false peace when you're around because your very being proves there's another way to live, one that doesn't require constant performance. So they distance themselves, not because you're wrong, but because you're right in ways they're not ready to face. Your authenticity shakes loose everything false. You don't ruin their comfort. You reveal it was never real to begin with. And once truth enters the room, illusion always has to leave. Number 11. You've stopped being hypnotized by the performance everyone else calls life, and that alone makes you dangerous to the illusion. The social world is built on invisible agreements, to pretend, to comply, to repeat. People wear masks not because they want to, but because they've been taught that survival depends on it. They talk about freedom, yet most of their choices are programmed by fear of rejection. The moment you step out of that loop, the moment you stop chasing validation and start choosing authenticity, you become the system's glitch, a reminder that not everyone can be bought with belonging. Society rewards those who blend in. It punishes those who think. You're expected to participate in the collective hypnosis, to laugh at what everyone laughs at, to care about what everyone cares about, to follow trends dressed as truths. But you don't play along anymore. You've seen behind the curtain. You've noticed how much of what's considered normal is just repetition without reflection. You've realized that most people aren't living, they're reacting. Their opinions are borrowed, their identities are stitched from social approval, and their confidence depends on numbers. You walking away from that makes you an anomaly. People can sense when you're unplugged from the performance. It unsettles them. They can't read you, can't manipulate you, can't predict you. You no longer feed the simulation by seeking attention or pretending to agree just to keep peace. That's why they call you strange or detached. It's easier to label you than to admit you're free. Your non-compliance threatens their comfort because you remind them they too could choose reality over reputation. You've learned that authenticity doesn't need applause. You don't need to broadcast your worth, prove your goodness, or audition for love. Real doesn't seek validation, it radiates it. And that's why you stand out. You're not trying to rebel, you've simply remembered who you are outside the collective programming. Every time you refuse to fake it, you interrupt the trance. You show that life doesn't have to be a stage, that peace doesn't require performance, and that truth doesn't need an audience. You are proof that awareness is the ultimate rebellion. The moment you wake up, the hypnosis loses power. Number 12. Your presence feels different, and that difference unsettles people who haven't yet grown into their own peace. You move with a kind of stillness that doesn't need to explain itself. You're not driven by approval, you're not hooked on attention, and you don't depend on constant social feedback to feel alive. That's foreign to those who measure their worth by reactions. They can't translate the energy you carry because it doesn't feed the same emotional economy they live in. You're not playing the same game, and that's why they think you're arrogant. You've risen to a frequency where gossip feels like noise, competition feels pointless, and envy feels absurd. You don't crave to be seen, you crave alignment. You no longer chase connection at the cost of your peace. That kind of energy disorients people who still trade validation like currency. They expect you to speak the language of insecurity, the back and forth of comparison, the subtle need to impress, the endless pursuit of approval. But you've outgrown that dialect. You speak through integrity now. You move through intention. You communicate through vibration more than words. And that's something most people can't hear because they haven't learned to listen beyond ego. Your calmness confuses them. They mistake your quiet confidence for coldness because they don't yet know what self-containment feels like. They think you're detached when really you're just discerning. They call you prideful when in truth you're just peaceful. They don't realize that what they interpret as distance is actually clarity. You've simply stopped matching energies that drain you. It's not superiority, it's sensitivity. You've become aware of how every interaction affects your inner balance. You no longer allow access to people who treat energy carelessly. That kind of boundary feels like rejection to the unhealed because they still think love means endless availability. But you've learned that true connection only happens when both people vibrate in truth, not in need. So they misunderstand you. They project, they gossip, they assume. But none of that reaches you. Because you're no longer tuned to that station. You've transcended the static. You're not louder, you're clearer. And to those still addicted to noise, clarity will always sound like arrogance until they evolve enough to recognize it as freedom. Number 13. You're not pulling away because you've given up on people. You're pulling back because you've outgrown the noise that used to define them. There comes a point when the world's chaos starts to feel like static, and every conversation drenched in fear, ego, or performance starts to sound the same. That's when solitude becomes sacred. You don't crave isolation, you crave clarity. You're not running from others, you're returning to yourself. People often misunderstand distance. They think stepping away means you're bitter, detached, or broken. But refinement requires space. You can't hear your own intuition when everyone else's opinions are screaming in your ears. You can't evolve while standing in environments built on competition and comfort. Growth demands silence. The kind of silence where your thoughts settle and your truth finally rises to the surface. That's not isolation, that's alignment. You've started to see that constant connection doesn't equal closeness. Being around people all the time can actually drown your essence. So you step back, not because you dislike humanity, but because you love authenticity. You'd rather have a few moments of real peace than a lifetime of loud pretense. In the stillness, you start to notice what's real, what resonates, what drains, what deserves your attention. Distance becomes your filter, and through it, everything false begins to fall away. Those who don't understand this path will take it personally. They'll say you've changed, become cold, or lost interest. But you haven't changed. You've refined. You've stripped away the unnecessary, the dramatic, the repetitive. You've traded crowds for clarity, validation for vision. That's what spiritual maturity looks like. Not louder faith, but quieter discernment. The truth is, you're not avoiding people. You're avoiding pollution, the emotional kind that clouds judgment and drains light. The more you refine, the less tolerance you have for anything that doesn't align with truth. You become selective not out of ego, but out of reverence for your own energy. This phase of refinement is where authenticity becomes your default state. You stop performing and start being. You stop explaining and start embodying. And when you emerge again, because you will, you'll come back not diminished but distilled, not lonelier but lighter, not isolated but pure. Number 14. You've learned that not every battle requires a blade. Some just demand presence. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's precision. It's the refusal to waste divine energy explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. In a world where noise has become a weapon, your quiet confidence is a counterstrike. You don't fight to prove worth. You expose falseness simply by being real. Every time you choose stillness over reaction, honesty over performance, you dismantle the machinery of manipulation that society runs on. The world worships volume, opinions shouted louder than truth, performances mistaken for personality. But you've discovered something they haven't. Stillness cuts deeper. Your calm disrupts what their chaos protects. It unnerves those who need constant distraction to avoid meeting themselves. Because when you stand in silence, masks start to melt, lies lose oxygen. In your refusal to entertain nonsense, people are forced to face their own emptiness. And that's why your peace feels like provocation. Your authenticity is not passive, it's an act of rebellion. You don't lower your tone to be liked. You don't dilute your truth to be digestible. You move with the quiet defiance of someone who has seen through the performance and decided not to participate. That decision, that holy refusal, is warfare of the purest kind. Because while everyone else is busy performing identity, you're embodying it. While they chase relevance, you radiate presence. There's an unspoken power in being unbothered. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. You know what deserves your response and what doesn't. You understand that reacting to every provocation only validates the noise trying to pull you down. So you stay silent, not out of fear, but out of control. You've turned restraint into a form of spiritual artillery. They'll call it withdrawal, but it's mastery. They'll call it pride, but it's poise. Because you know that silence isn't the absence of power, it's its containment. The world screams to feel significant. You whisper and make them listen. Every moment you choose presence over participation, you win another unseen war. You are the reminder that stillness isn't surrender, it's strategy. And in a culture addicted to performance, nothing terrifies pretenders more than a soul that refuses to act. At the end of it all, This isn't about arrogance, distance, or superiority. It's about awakening. When you stop dumbing yourself down just to be understood, you stop betraying the very essence that makes you different. The world will call it pride, coldness, or isolation. But that's only because most people have never met someone who refuses to perform. Your authenticity exposes what others hide behind. And that's why your presence unsettles them. You've learned that silence can be power, solitude can be purification, and self-respect can sound like rebellion. You've realized that not every connection is nourishment, not every conversation deserves participation, and not every audience is meant to understand your language. There's peace in being misunderstood when your intention is pure. There's freedom in not explaining yourself when your spirit already speaks louder than words ever could. The truth is, your refusal to conform isn't an act of rejection. It's an act of remembrance. You're remembering who you are beneath the noise. You're remembering that light doesn't dim to make darkness comfortable. You're remembering that you were never meant to be common, digestible, or easy to label. You were meant to evolve, to rise so high in truth that only those vibrating in authenticity can reach you. So let them misunderstand, let them project, let them gossip. While they're performing for attention, you're preparing for ascension. You're not walking away, you're walking upward. And the view from clarity is worth every inch of distance you had to create to get there. If this message spoke to your soul, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's on the same journey of awakening. Drop a comment below and let me know which part resonated most deeply with you. Your story might be the light someone else needs tonight. Until next time, stay true, stay rare, and never apologize for being the unfiltered version of yourself. God bless you.